Thanks for joining us and welcome to Mormon Stories Australia. The purpose of this podcast is to give those who transition out of Mormonism or other orthodox religions a space to discuss, process, share insights from, and celebrate their journeys out of religious orthodoxy. Our stories are each unique, but many of our journeys are profoundly similar. Listener discretion is advised as we occasionally touch on very sensitive subjects. We hope you enjoy the program. Hi everyone, and welcome back to Mormon Stories Australia. This is our fourth episode, and we have a really special episode today with two of my close friends, Dan and Mike. Dan and Mike, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having us. Yeah.
So what's really unique about this conversation, aside from the fact that we're all close friends and we've known each other for a while, is that although Mormon Stories Australia is focused mainly on Mormons and supporting them in their transitions, in this particular case, I think it'd be really useful and interesting to have a conversation with the two of you because neither of you were Mormons ever, and yet you were both highly religious at one point in your life and transitioned out of that. In this case, both of you were Christian, but not the same type of Christianity either, right? So up front, let's just give like a quick intro to both of you and then talk about like at a high level your just a super high level, your religious life cycle, and then we'll go into a deep dive one by one. So Michael, do you want to start?
So I guess I grew up as a Christian, Baptist, fundamental, evangelical Christian, and I was basically in a very religious family up until about 22, at which point I started questioning things, and that kind of led to a journey out of faith. Which was very complicated, but also a very enriching experience.
And so you've been out for a while now, like a couple of years.
It's been like 10, 11 years.
Right. Yeah. Cool. And so Baptist, right? And Daniel, how about yourself?
I grew up. My parents were Methodist, which then became Uniting Church. So. They weren't particularly strict in terms of their faith. In fact, they didn't even baptize either myself or my brother. And they said, well, that was our choice. So, but I sort of got hooked into the more conservative or evangelical, as Michael said, side of Protestant Christianity. In my late teens, which became more appealing than the somewhat slightly more liberal Christianity of the Uniting Church, because it had simple answers, I guess, to life's big questions, and that was very appealing. In addition to there was the social dimension as well. I was a bit of a nerdy kid, so it was very attractive both for the answers it provided, and in addition to the sort of the social community dimension as well. I was in that for about 20 years, and I've about 5 years since I've left. So not quite as long as Michael, but a decent amount of time.
Great. Okay. Cool. Well, I think so. I just want to introduce to our listeners one of the reasons why I think this is a very important podcast, and then we'll go into each of your stories. So as I've said before, the podcast is primarily focused on supporting Mormons who transition out and to tell the stories of people who go through a faith transition. But one of the key things that, there are a couple of things that come to mind in a faith transition is that going out of Mormonism to something else is, although not identical, very similar to leaving Christianity or leaving Islam or leaving any Orthodox religion. And so that's the first reason, which is just that I think our listeners who have primarily focused on Mormons transitioning and Mormon stories can sometimes miss the bigger landscape of people transitioning out of other religions. And so there are certain information or facts or psychological things that they might pick up on that are very similar to their own journeys. And the second reason, which I'm not going to be subtle about, is that approximately 10%, if I'm right with the data, John Dehlin did a study and he has some data, approximately 10% of people who transition out of Mormonism transition to become Christians. So they leave Mormonism, but they become Christians. And so, they realize the Book of Mormon isn't true, but then they resort to the Bible to find out what is true. And so one of the reasons why I wanted to interview the two of you is because I think that those people don't really get the opportunity much to hear people who transition out of Christianity. And so if you could visualize their faith as like a set of shelves, and we've discussed this before, Mormonism at least tries to be Christianity 2.0, right? Joseph Smith, instead of one heaven, there are three, and instead of just being baptized and accepting Jesus, you need to go to the temple. He just upgraded everything. And so, and that was his sales pitch, right, essentially. So a lot of times what happens is the shelf of Mormonism breaks due to the evidence. But then what happens is their faith drops down to the next shelf, which is Jesus and Christianity. And sometimes people who transition out of Mormonism don't consider enough the critical information about Christianity itself. And ironically, for exactly the same reasons, they might have been reluctant to consider the critical information about Mormonism, which is that they have a faith, they have a belief, they want life to have this story, this meaning, they want an afterlife, etc. And so one of the reasons why I want to interview the two of you is because you are more familiar with why Christianity isn't true, right? As like the critical arguments against it, where Mormons are focused very much on the Book of Mormon or Joseph Smith or these things, but they don't hear much about Christianity in general, which is a totally different subject matter. So that's me just letting the audience know like why I think this interview is important, and so you can see the parallels in the journey. Cool. So who wants to start first with a deep dive into like your upbringing and why you decided to be, in your case, you decided to be religious at one point? Which of you wants to go first? After you.
Oh no, I was going to say, you're giving me the look. It's me.
Okay.
It's going to be me.
Okay. Go for it. So as you said, your parents raised you, but not super religious.
Yeah, that's right. And not forgetting, this is a time where, it'd be in Australia, you'd be talking, 80+% would at least identify as Christian. They might not be involved in the local church or the Christian community, but Australia was a very Christian country. So for me, growing up like that, it wasn't, as I said, it was not a very conservative form of Christianity. But it was normalized for me, if that makes sense. So by the time I did come to my teens and the allure of sort of a more conservative or evangelical, really fundamentalist view of the world came along, it wasn't like I was, going from 0 to 100 in 10 seconds. This to me was just a different version, I guess, of what I was used to and what had become normalized.
You were going to truly find Jesus, right?
Yeah, that's right. In fact, I remember one of the guys at church at the time, this was one of the late teens, and we were going to a Uniting Church. He came to me one day and he said, "Oh, this church doesn't really preach the gospel," right? And so, that kind of, I guess, set a seed in me that, and I really trusted this guy in terms of, his views. He knew more about the Bible than me, certainly. And so that was one of a few things that sort of headed me in that direction. Plus, of course, the more conservative and the fundamentalist churches, they did have a much stronger contingent of people my age. Again, quite possibly for the similar reasons to why I found it appealing. Simple answers, and the sort of and then there was a social community dimension. So very, very attractive to me to go into that style of church. But of course, with that, there was a more conservative belief, and I went from, just trying to pick my words here, my view of God, I think, changed. I think that, to me, it wasn't so fear-based in the more liberal Uniting Church. And then it became, quite fear-based. Heaven and hell.
Yeah.
You've got two choices to make, and if you don't believe, the right things, you're going to the other place, along with your family and friends. And so now you're on a mission from God, to save them from God's judgment.
Got it.
Yeah.
So just to take a step back and ask for clarification. So Mormons are very used to a single monolithic religion, which is like Mormonism, the LDS Church. And so for Mormons, it can be a little bit confusing. Even ex-Mormons, a bit confusing to see the shades of Christianity. That for you to flow from one church to another, that's something that we don't even know. Like, we're not even remotely familiar with the concept of you go to church at this church, and then after a while you realize it doesn't work for you, and then you transition to this church. So just to clarify that switch, your parents raised you in the Uniting Church, which is is there any difference between that and the Methodists, or is that exactly the same thing?
In Australia in the late 70s, the Methodists, the Congregationalists, and 70% of the Presbyterian churches combined to form the Uniting Church, and it was part of a broader liberalising movement within those churches.
Okay, and then you're leaving the Uniting Church and going to, is it the Anglican?
The Sydney Anglican Church, yes.
Church. That is technically like what kind of switch is that? I mean, you've been talking about how it's a switch to more fundamental Christianity.
Yes.
But is it a matter of being baptized again? Did you have to get rebaptized?
No, I didn't have to get rebaptized. I was baptized in the Uniting Church. It's 17 or 18, I think I was at the time. And that was my choice as well. Churches recognize each other's baptisms within Protestant Christianity. Catholics do not recognize a Protestant's baptism, actually. But no, I did not have to get rebaptized. I didn't have to, say I believe a certain set of creeds or something like that to attend the church and be a member of the church. I think there was a certain expectation that you did, though.
Okay.
But it wasn't a formal process.
Okay, got it. That's very interesting because, again, we're so used to the missionary religion, the one true church is monolithic. Entry and exit into Mormonism is pretty dramatic, right? And it's pretty clear. Like, you enter by being baptized and you start paying tithing and all this stuff. And you exit by whatever means. But so for you, it sounds more like it's an everyday thing that Christians sort of float from Protestant church to other Protestant church.
Absolutely. There's a phrase, and I suspect after what you just said, you don't have it in Mormonism, but church shopping.
Church shopping. Yeah. We don't have that phrase.
When you kind of when it's like, well, I don't like, this particular church because maybe they have a particular stance on an issue you don't like, or maybe there's not a lot of people in your sort of age or demographic, then you'll go to another one. And possibly also the difference is there's a lot of churches can just start up in Protestant Christianity. You can have a church plant. I don't know if you're familiar with that, where they'll have typically a younger, on fire for Jesus type minister, and he will secure a place in, a public school or even a movie theater.
My sister's about to do one, actually.
Okay.
Really?
Yeah. So, and then suddenly
a movie theater. What do you mean?
Like movie theater. Sunday morning, it's an unused space with sort of certain,
and so you start a congregation.
You start
some charismatic, visionary leader says, these other guys, they're not doing it as well as they could. So it's a very entrepreneurial space.
In that sense, yes, because being on a mission from God, it is almost like there is almost a need to completely reinvent. And I think that the churches that are trending now I would say are I don't know if hipsters slightly gone out, but certainly a couple of years ago, the more hipster congregations were the ones that were trending. And while And it is somewhat an exercise in marketing, sort of having stepped away from that. You do come out being a little bit cynical, I guess, because fundamentally they do believe the same things, except there's a veneer of social acceptability on top of it. And in fact, like St. Paul used to talk about, when you're in Rome, etc., etc. When I'm with the Jews, I become as one under the law, etc. So it's kind of just this sort of Schmelian sort of, almost there, because you've got to get people through the door and you've got to convert people, and so it's very interesting to see.
You make the gospel accessible.
You make it accessible as possible. That's right. And you try and remove every cultural barrier as you can to get the message into the ears of the listeners.
So let me just picture some young minister, or like he's been brought up religious, but he's quite visionary, and he's looking at how things are done at his local congregation, and he's saying, I think we could make the music different this way, and I think we could have a band that has these instruments, and I think that we could have talks on these subjects. I think we could be more liberal on these subjects, and so like they come up with a variation. That's like still Christianity, and still many of the core ideas are the same, but there's like a slight variation.
Yeah, that's right. I would say probably out of all those, the liberalism would be the last thing to shift.
Yeah.
I'd say before that, they'd probably worry about the quality of the coffee they served after the service, and whether they were going to shift on any fundamentals of the faith.
Yeah.
So to go back, these are very attractive churches. So you don't just have the established ones that people church shop for. These things are popping up all the time. All the time.
So as I said, it seems very entrepreneurial. It even seems it's like a franchise in some sense. Like you are a franchisee as a minister. Do you have to join any organization, like register your new congregation with anything?
A lot of congregations are supported by a denomination. But not all of them are. There are some lone rangers, I guess, in one sense, and they go and start their own thing. I guess typically they've come from a religious background. I've come across people like that. So they can either be supported, or they might go and do it sort of off their own bat. So there's a range.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So when you transitioned across, but primarily you were transitioning from the United Church to Anglican.
Yes, that's correct. Sydney Anglican, yeah, particularly, yes.
And so it sounds at least like the Anglicans are like. Okay, yeah. So let's just continue. Right? At that point, so you were persuaded that your beliefs needed to change in some way and become more fundamental.
Yes, I was. Yes. Yeah, that's correct.
And there was a social aspect, I think.
There absolutely there was a social aspect. And I said, I think it's a little bit chicken and egg in terms of, the churches which were providing what I consider quite simplistic but very, very assuring, or seemingly assuring answers were the ones that did seem to attract the young people. And there was this real emphasis on teaching. And when I was, this is sort of, going back a couple of decades, good teaching versus bad teaching. So the Sydney Anglicans would not consider, by the way, a lot of Protestant churches Christian, right? They would say their teaching was bad teaching, and we have good teaching, and they have bad teaching. Services were, on your forward, it was sort of like a 45-minute lecture, if you want, exposition of the Bible. So obviously, again, for younger people seeking answers, fantastic. That's fantastic. And I said it's a little bit chicken and egg, but these churches seem to have the large younger congregations, thirsty for answers about life, because it's a kind of point of life where people, are questioning. And here it is, all neatly packaged. And by the way, we've got all these other great programs you can get involved with. Like, it's very, 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 very attractive for a certain kind of person.
Yeah, great. Yeah, makes sense. So how did your folks react to your going into that?
Well, it's interesting.
Because you were going to it, now technically another church of some sort.
Yeah, that's right. I guess it's funny. We didn't talk about it too much, to be honest. I think they were happy enough that I was still going to a church. Yeah. I think it's probably the best thing. You know, I was somewhat consumed by it. I think they probably, I mean, we didn't have any big discussions about it, but I think there were, looking back, there were probably comments expressed about my level of involvement, because you know, I did go down the rabbit hole on this stuff, right?
You went deep,
but they never sat me down and said, listen, we're worried that you know, this is overtaking your life, and other things that should be taking priority are you know, going in the back seat. But I think they were happy that I was going to a church.
Okay, cool.
Good. Rather than walking away.
Cool. So let's go to the next phase. Obviously you were in the Anglican church for what, over 20 years in total?
I was.
So it's difficult, of course, to summarize 20 years of your life in the church, but like, maybe let me ask you at a high level one question, like positive things that it brought to you, and then on the other hand, some of the negative things, like not having prayers answered, that kind of stuff.
Sure. Absolutely. And I just probably want to again highlight for people listening that was the Sydney Anglicans. They, if you know something about Anglican churches, you may see them as sort of pseudo-Catholic, and a lot of them are. They're called High Anglicans. The Sydney Anglicans are called they're Low Anglicans, in terms of they don't go for the trimmings and trappings of a more sacramental service. They don't wear robes. You can meet in the church. You can meet in the the local scout hall, one of these ones we talked about. So it's ritual and so forth is not a big part. It's about the teaching. So for me, it wasn't a bad thing. I just want to highlight that, and that's taken some reflection to come to that view at the time, and given sort of where I was and where I was socially and so forth. It wasn't a bad thing at the time. It did give me a social life and friends, and you know, some friends, I'd have to say, looking back, some friends that one or two that I'm still in contact with, good people, but I stayed too long. And I guess the trap for someone like me is you go into it, and while it's good for a time, you become reliant on it. And this is one of the things that it does very well, and it teaches you to be very codependent. You see, and so the longer you're in, the harder it is to get out. So for me, I was in there I was going to church for 20 years, and I also did a bit of this church shopping, which I described. Because again, you would kind of, it was something that people did do, and I guess you kind of always go, if you've been at church for a while, you identify the problems with it, and you always think, well, maybe the grass is greener, and so you shift. But for me, there was a couple of things sort of, coming up towards the end of this 20 years. It was GFC related. I lost my job, and I didn't get a permanent job for 6 years. And that was tough. It was contract to contract, but there were big gaps in between. Despite all my fervent prayers, you see, that was tough. That was tough both financially and psychologically.
Did you ever wonder, like, whether you were doing something wrong, and that's why God wouldn't give you a full-time job?
Well, my memory's not good enough to answer that. But I would have to say there were people, when you talk to people, part of the problem with unanswered prayers is always people who will give you a reason for why it isn't answered, other than, the obvious thing.
The obvious reason.
The obvious reason that there's either no one there to answer it, or the person that is there doesn't have the capacity to do it. But it's always on you.
Yes.
You didn't. No, it is. It comes down to you haven't got enough faith for this. You're asking with the wrong motivations. Did you fast and pray? No, I didn't fast and pray.
Oh,
well, that's your problem.
Yeah.
So there's all sorts of reasons. There's it's almost, to me, it's almost like the sub industry of getting God off the hook. With reasons why things don't turn out. Yeah. And then I had the other thing, whereas I'd want to sort of get married and have a family for many years as well, and that was something that was becoming increasingly not likely to happen by the looks of things. So that was also something I was praying about as well. So it was a tough time, sort of. It was a tough time in the sort of late 30s, but I struggled through. On because of my struggle. I persevered through trials and tribulations and counted it as blessing. You'd say.
Yes. So there's those ensuing years we were talking about how. You said there were many positive aspects, of course, to being a believer, the community, the purpose of your life, simple answers to these tricky questions, already off the shelf. Yes. So many things that were just off the shelf.
That's right.
But you're saying that in your late 30s, that two particular things in your life made things really difficult.
Yes,
the first was that you, for a period, 6 years, you said, were going from contract to contract, not being able to get a full-time job.
That's right.
And you were praying a lot to God to get you a full-time job to help.
Right.
And the other was family. Like you had a desire to settle down, get married, have kids, have a family.
Right. Yeah.
And you were obviously, praying to God, I assume, to know who the right person is, to help get him to guide you to the right person.
Right. Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
And, I think one day when I was out walking with you in Eastwood, we walked past an Anglican church and you were looking at the young adults talking to each other and flirting and stuff. And I remember you were telling me that it brings back sort of memories of your Anglican time.
Absolutely. Yes, that's very true.
So these things made life difficult, but they didn't make you disbelieve.
They didn't. No, they didn't. But it was tough. But I persevered, as Michael said. There were two things. So there was the actual what do we call that? There was the actual what was happening day to day. The other part was the belief. Now, because of as I described, my difficulty getting a permanent job, I decided to switch careers to a more stable one. I decided to try teaching. Because I had an undergraduate, I was able to do a diploma of education. And I decided to do it at the Catholic University. One of the reasons for that was you became a lot more employable. We have the state government system, obviously. There's a lot of Catholic schools as well. So to have that, I thought that's going to increase my opportunity to be employed. Now, it's interesting because part of this course at the Catholic University, you had to, well, certainly not everyone, but I had to, because I didn't have enough teaching areas, specializing. Yeah. They said, well, if you don't have at least 2, then you have to be able to teach religious studies to be employed. I went, well, that's not a problem. And in fact, they were offering it at summer school. So before I started my first term in earnest, they had a summer school where you could go in, get a subject out of the way, and I thought, well, that'll be good because it's a big workload, and that'll help. So I went and did that in the summer school intensive. Now, understanding this, that at that time, really, I'd only been exposed to teaching or lecturing or so forth on the Bible, in church, or at least in a very Christian context. For example, the conferences, church weekends away, where you get a lot of Bible teaching. But at the Catholic University, and to their credit, they took the non-presuppositional view of the Bible, and that is, we're going to study it as an ancient document, which it obviously is. We're not going to assume anything else about it. So it was an actual academic study. And just to caveat that, it's not to say you can't go to a Christian university and do academic studies, but it was a study in the sense that we're not giving it as a special privilege. And wow, that
so just to clarify, that was the first time, if I'm aware, in your life where someone started talking about the Bible in a non-worshipful sense. Like in church, you get this is God's word. We're
Yeah.
just trying to understand it.
Yeah.
Whereas in the Catholic University, you got this is an ancient document.
Mm.
We're just trying to understand it, and the premise was a bit different.
Yeah,
And-
absolutely.
Like, I mean, how was your first class? Like, you walked into class the first day, and they started talking. Was it quite different to what you'd experienced in church?
Well, it was. It was lectures rather than a sermon. Although a lot of the sermons I had were very much that lecture style, but no, I can't remember the specific context because it was a few years ago now. But I remember being surprised at what I was hearing, I guess. The real kicker was the assignments, though, because they asked us to write assignments. For example, for example, why the nativity narrative in the opening chapters of Luke to do with the census and so forth, why this couldn't have been historical. And I was, and I have to admit, I didn't answer that. And I'll explain why just briefly in a minute. I didn't answer that because it was a bit too close to home.
Yeah.
And I did the Old Testament ones as well.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
example,
We can smear the Old Testament.
so example, the book of Jonah,
That's easy.
which is one I think I did. Explain why the book of Jonah is sort of more allegorical, not historical. Okay, that's good. That's the Old Testament.
Yep.
I can live with the fact that an Old Testament book is allegory.
Yeah.
But don't
touch my New Testament.
Don't touch my New Testament because, of course, as you know, the opening to Luke, which the evangelicals love to say, is that Luke says it's my dear Theophilus, I have undergone basically investigation of all these things that have been said about Christ and here's my account. So they love to say the Gospel of Luke is history because of that introduction. But then launch into a thing which was the census, of course, and there's absolutely no substantiating evidence outside the Bible that ever happened. And we're talking about a census which was the movement of the entire Roman Empire to the place of their ancestry. That's an upheaval of an enormous amount of population. It doesn't make practical sense and so forth. But we know, and the reason the Catholics were asking to do this, because we're looking at it from the theological point of view, in that to fulfill an Old Testament or believed Old Testament prophecy, they had to get Christ
in the right place at the right time.
Yeah. And so that's what they were trying to get us to look at. That, but of course it undermined my view. As I said, I didn't actually go and write the assignment. This was something I looked at in more detail later.
But you took mental note.
I took mental note.
That was a thing.
It was too much for me to consider at the time,
Yes.
but I took mental note and I researched this later because, of course, again, it's sowed the seed. So I did that course. I got great marks. And I was quite pleased with that. But in getting those marks, I'd had to change my view, or at least write in a way which was contrary to what I believe. As I said, for me, the Old Testament, I can take that as allegory. I can live with that. You talked about the shelf theory. I can crash through that shelf. But then there's the New Testament shelf, historicity sitting under it, and I'm okay. I can stay on that. So that was the beginning of an unraveling for me. It didn't happen during that course, but it got my mind thinking a certain direction, and I read and I researched and read and researched, and that set me on another path. Now, to go back to what I was saying about things like unanswered prayer and so forth and so on, there was also happening in day-to-day life, coupled with the fact that my beliefs were now evolving and changing, and there was a lot of explanatory power in that, you see. So now the reason that prayers weren't answered was matching what I would consider evolved beliefs. And so rather than the explanations that you prayed but you didn't fast, I now was at least open to the idea of, well, maybe if there is a God, it's not the kind of God that answers prayers in the way the New Testament claims, like in Matthew, and Jesus says, ask anything in my name will be given to you. Maybe that's wrong.
So it's just one little step back from that belief, right?
Yeah, that's
or forward technically.
So that's right. So for me, it was, and you talked about the shelf theory. It was, it took a while for me to get to a point where I was able to walk away. But it's the unraveling, or as a Seinfeld once said about, relationship breakups, and he compared it to pushing over a Coke vending machine. It says you don't just push over a Coke vending machine. You got to rock it backwards and forwards before it falls over. And that's what it was like. And but I had friends come to me and say, "Oh, you just want to leave Christianity because you wanted to sin." I was like, well, no, I didn't. In fact, I never went looking for this.
Yes,
I never went looking for this. In fact, and then the thought, of course, went to me. It's like, well, God knew this would happen.
Yeah. Why did he?
And yet he didn't protect me, because apparently he doesn't give you more than you can bear. But clearly,
yes,
clearly I couldn't bear what was put in front of me in terms of staying with the same set of beliefs.
Cool. So you did the course at the Catholic University, and you did that assignment, but I assume that ended after that first semester. Is that right?
Yeah, that's yes. It was only one course.
One.
I did a few more weeks of the teaching thing in the first semester, and then decided it wasn't for me. Okay. But completely separate to that course.
But the door had been like cracked slightly open.
Oh yeah.
For the first time in your whole life.
I would say I'd had doubts before, but there was always a way back in. But this was almost like the door had been cracked open. Another, the toothpaste was out of tube on this one. Yeah. As opposed to the door analogy, the doors can be shut again, but the toothpaste was out of the tube. This time. Yeah.
And what I find very interesting, I want to point out, is I've come to believe that once your mind like latches on to a certain idea, once you've heard a particular argument, that you can't escape that argument anymore. So for me, one of the first arguments in Mormonism that my mind latched onto was that the Book of Mormon contains translation errors that are unique to the King James Bible that Joseph Smith owned. And although I didn't believe the first person who said that, I read that statement and I was like, oh, this can't be true, right? But the mind like latches on to that because it's a unique fact, and it's something you'd never thought about before, and it has a straightforward interpretation. It has high explanatory power. Right?
Yes.
And then you later on do research. So it's interesting that you connected to that assignment that you didn't take.
Yes.
But your mind latched onto that idea. It remembered that problem was an assignment topic.
Yes.
And you later on did research.
Yes, that's correct.
So walk us through like the next few weeks and months. How did you begin your journey of like deep dive research into critical material about the Bible?
Well, there was a couple of things. Of course, the internet being what it is these days was a very useful resource to me. There was one particular podcast by I wouldn't say it was an academic, Robert Price, who used to be, interestingly, evangelical back in the 70s. I believe a Baptist pastor. This is in the States, and he went through, I won't say the same journey, but he similarly transitioned out of faith, and then podcasted about various things. And the reason I found him actually was funny was about and I know we've talked about this before, was the JEDP theory,
which you told me about. So which I found really fascinating.
Theory in Genesis, and I'd never heard of this, of course. And for the listeners, it's probably worth Googling and going into in detail. But
I can summarize it. The JEDP theory is just explaining the authorship of the first few books of the Old Testament, right? And even with just linguistic analysis, you can very clearly see that different writers wrote different parts.
That's right.
And until you pointed it out, you've used the phrase "hidden in plain sight." Right. And so many of the times when we've talked about the truth about the Bible or the religion, so many things are just hidden in plain sight. So if you read the first chapter of Genesis, and then go read the second one, and just read these two chapters, and then tell me if you can't tell there's a switch. Like there's a lurching switch of language style between the first one and the second one, and it's so obvious. It's like, don't look, guys, and it's just like this. And even in Hebrew, one uses, if you look at, and I looked at this text after you told me about it, in Hebrew, one uses Elohim, and the other one uses, I forgot, Yahweh.
Yahweh.
Yeah. So like the word for God is different between the two, etc.
Yeah, very true. Very true.
So, but yeah, that's just my quick summary of the JPDP.
I came across this particular Robert M. Price's podcast because of the JPD theory. So that was very useful. And then he started talking about other issues. And I guess, look, it was mostly the internet, I have to say. Like I'd had a couple of, I'd had access to the Catholic library, but it was really the material that was available online that was able, to help me dig deeper.
Okay. And I want to ask about your emotional state. Like, so you have a lifetime of belief in Jesus, in Christianity, in the Bible.
Yeah.
And for the first time, you're like encountering seriously troubling things. Like, where did that put you emotionally?
Oh, it wasn't easy, obviously. It was funny because so much of my life was tied up with the church. So, so I did the church shopping again, but in terms of, I couldn't continue to listen to the more fundamental or evangelical / fundamental style of preaching because I knew the problems now with the text, and I kept cutting my losses in terms of, well, I'll find a more liberal church and a more liberal church and a more liberal church, and I think I went to probably one of the most liberal ones I could find on a recommendation from a friend and who happened to know, not that he endorsed them, and I couldn't go there either.
So nothing was liberal.
No, it was more that I found them all a bit odd rather than they were nice, but it was not something I could see myself as. That sounds a bit mean, but I couldn't see myself being part of the community, if I can put it that way.
Yeah, right.
It was very traumatic time because it was so much of my life invested in this. And of course, there was the talking from an emotional point of view, what seems to be the last gas station, I guess, or last pit stop out is the fear-based one, of course, which is, well, now you're going to hell.
Someone said that to you?
No, well, that was what I thought.
Oh, right.
So, well, people have been saying it to me for 20 years every week, right?
Yeah,
essentially, at church, essentially. And so it's like, well, now I'm screwed, right? And I'm going to the place where I've been thinking that everyone else was going up to that point who didn't believe the right things, and now I'm the one not believing the right things. So that was pretty bad. And I have to say, I had trouble sleeping for a time, and I did have to go and see a GP and actually get medication to go to sleep. And I took that for many months actually. So that was tough. That was tough. And of course, happening in parallel with that was sort of me losing my social network, of course, because it was all built around the church. And I have to say, apart from people at work, I hardly knew anyone who didn't go to either my church or a church somewhere. So suddenly I was left without the support network as well, or at least a support network who would understand.
Yes.
And when you did try and have these conversations, they didn't end well usually, because people would think, and I understand now, it was tough at the time, but I understand now that they just wanted me to come back.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So have you tried this? You should try going to this service, or you should try going to this church. It's like, you don't understand. Like, I just don't believe X, Y, and Z at all. Yeah. It's not a matter of I'm going to the wrong service. So that was tough. Yeah. And I understand it was hard at the time for people who thought, oh, well, you're good friends, but they just can't hear what you're saying. Yeah. I suspect now a lot of people do harbour these doubts themselves. And
the movement is growing.
And having someone around that kind of, brings this stuff up, I think is not comfortable to be around that person. So eventually, I still have a handful of friends from those days. But thankfully, there were people I would have been friends with anyway. Yeah. And I think that's it. For when you find out that a lot of the friendships are contextual on your way to church. Yes. No hard feelings either way. Yeah. But when you're out of the context, it's no longer present. So
Yeah, in the subsequent years since I left Mormonism, I've thought a lot about friendships that revolved around the church, and I think what you just said is very fair, actually, because there was a time when I was like, "Oh, are these really my true friends? I don't believe," and so on. But it is fair to say that a lot of friendships are contextual. Like I had mates in my old company that I would talk to every day when I was working with them.
Yeah.
And now that I move on, we don't talk that much either.
Yeah.
So it is kind of fair to say that. But that's the most charitable interpretation.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, there are some cases where you are ostracized.
I think that's right. I like to give people the benefit of the doubt, but it was hard at the time because they're like, "Oh, I thought you were my friends," and now that I'm not going to church, like no one contacts me, no one. But now I realise what it is.
Well,
I don't think it's malicious.
Yes,
For 9 out of 10 people, I don't think it is malicious.
Well, and I think both of you share this view, but I view people who have orthodox religion and they're really absorb all these ideas. I view them as victims of the ideas themselves. I don't view them as. I mean, they do cause harm to other people by propagating those ideas, but they are themselves primarily victims in my mind.
Yes.
So that gives me some compassion for their situation.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, wow. So how long is this how long would you say between you first went to the Catholic course and the final pit stop where you realized you didn't believe anymore? How long is that period of time?
Oh, that's a good question. I'd put it around it's a very, very good question.
Because it's a gradual realization.
It is a gradualization, and it's not always necessarily in the same direction. There's
a back and forth.
There's a little bit. A little bit of back and forth going on. There's a little bit of back and forth going on there, and even now sometimes I think, wouldn't it be good if aspect X, Y, Z were true?
Yeah.
For example, wouldn't it be good if starving kids over in Africa, to use that cliche, prayed and got food?
Yep.
Wouldn't that be great if it worked like that?
Yeah.
So there's part of I think Christopher Hitchens had something to say. It's like there are those people kind of believe it's true. There are those who wish it's true, and he was the one that is glad it's sort of not true.
Yeah.
And doesn't wish it to be true either. Yeah. But it is back and forth. Look, I'd have to say it was 2, 3, 4 years, and I can't give you a certain.
So about 4 years.
There was it was a long time. It was a long time coming out.
Yeah.
It's hard to separate the period of when I stopped believing certain things, when the period I recovered from stopping believing certain things. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
It is hard.
It's a transition. It's a phase
that
you go through. It takes ages.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. And so you left. Well, there is one thing that is easier to pinpoint. Like, when was the last time you went to church?
Oh,
and
okay.
You stopped going. Yeah, altogether.
Well, I think I visited a friend's church because they asked me to go, and there was a long break between me going to church and going to this particular one. But
I mean, habitually going.
Habitually going.
Like every week or every second week. There must have been a slow phase where it just kind of stopped.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. I can't remember.
Yeah.
I apart from that visiting the one church, I actually can't remember. I can't tell you exactly the last church I went to regularly.
Okay.
It really was a constant stepping down.
Yeah. And as you said, you were church shopping as well, so there may have been some degree of you go to this church, that one, and then you don't go, and then you.
Yeah. Exactly.
Got it. Wow. Okay. Then let's talk a bit about your post-religious life before we get to Michael's story.
Yeah.
So, by the way, we all met at the Sunday Assembly, which is one of the efforts that all three of us have independently tried to find community outside of religion. That's how I found the Sunday Assembly, and that's I assume both of you are the same.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
So there must have been a period of time where you were looking for community, looking for friends.
Absolutely. Can't remember how I found out about Sunday Assembly, but I did go along. But even then, it was and Michael will remember. I sat well up the back. I didn't want people to know I was there. It sat up the back with a cap on. I just wanted to go in, hear and not really, it's kind of, because I felt it was strange for me to go there.
Yeah.
Because it was church, but it wasn't, obviously.
Yeah.
And it was strange for me to go there. And of course, I think, dealing with these particular feelings of, like I'm sort of, I'm now on the wrong side.
We're still very raw, right?
It was still very raw. That's correct. That's correct. So I did look for community, and I think the thing for me, I was used to community. I hadn't, I guess, grown the social muscle, if that makes sense, where you go out and you work hard and you find your own tribe, as it were. I was used to like, there's a building, there's a sign hanging out the door where they say people meet. I'll just turn up there, and here they all are. So I was still at that stage. I still didn't really have the ability to build a social network or engage or link up with a group at that point. So for me, it was like, here's a non-religious version of what I'm used to. Good, we'll go there.
Yeah. It's interesting that you point out the social muscle, because we had the same thing like coming out, and I never really thought about it that way before. But you have a reliance on this organization to provide your social network. Again, one of the things that comes out of the box, right, is that social community.
Exactly.
To rebuild that. Wow. And then you met us, so we'll get to that in a minute. But and so just for our listeners, after we're done talking about Michael's strategy, we're going to talk a bit about post-religious life, I guess, from all three of us, and we'll bring our stories together that way. But thanks, Daniel, so far. That is amazing recount, and thanks for sharing.
Well, thanks for the opportunity.
And so, Michael, we'll turn to yours. So let's talk about, Michael, your journey. So somewhat distinct from Daniel's. Of course, each of our journeys is pretty unique, but you were raised in the Baptist church.
Yes.
Tell us a bit about your upbringing. What was it like?
Yeah.
Any positive memories of being a young child in the Baptist church?
Well, I guess I'll preface this by saying it's revisiting this after 10 years of being religious and growing and learning. It does kind of change the things that are relevant, that feel relevant now compared to what felt relevant when I had just left my religion. So I'd say it's like similar to Daniel, like I grew up in a Christian context, but I think what strikes me now, like looking back, is understanding that, I was a first generation Christian. So my dad was converted, and then brought me up as a Christian and my family up as Christian, despite the fact that my grandfather was a scientist and an atheist. So I think that becomes very relevant to the whole picture. But that being said, like growing up religiously, I mean, I think there was a lot of good things about it because, it gave you community, it gave you friends, it gave you somewhere to belong, I guess. And growing up the way we did, I think my family desperately needed that because my dad came in from England and my mum came in from the Philippines, and so there wasn't this huge family network when we grew up. And I guess so church then becomes family, I guess. So I guess that's the positives of it. It was that, it gave a sense of belonging and a sense of connection to a wider community.
Good. And were you particularly orthodox? Like, were you super believing? Where did you come in that spectrum?
Yeah, so I was brought up with like a faith as truth paradigm. So basically, the values I was brought up with was that we believed in Christianity because it was true. It was never about keeping up appearances or adhering to a family tradition or anything like that. It was very much Jesus is the Son of God. We need to spread the gospel because if we don't, people will go to hell, and and people need to know about Jesus. So it's very black and white and very, I guess, practical. It's very pragmatic. So it's kind of like almost irreverent in a sense. And that I probably came into play into my apostasy, like my journey out of faith as well. Was that, I guess, ability to be irreverent, to ask questions. So it's kind of interesting that some of the fundamental values that brought my dad into faith and played out in the way we lived our faith as a family and how I was brought up into it was the same thing that probably drove me out of it as well.
Can you elaborate on that? Like, what were those values?
I mean, so my dad especially wasn't afraid of conflict, I think, and he was always willing to ask difficult questions and disagree with people. And that's something that's actually, I think, he does very well and does a lot. And I think is a major point of difference between him and a lot of other religious people. And because of that, when I did start having my doubts, I was never afraid of them. I guess.
So you were used to constructive conflict.
Yeah.
Healthy conflict.
And critical thinking. And the willingness to question. And because of that, it became a matter of like, okay, I was taught that Christianity was true, so I need to believe it as truth. And so it became a journey of going, if these questions are coming up, I actually have to objectively answer them. I can't just settle for an answer because it's convenient, or pick Christianity because that's what I was brought up with. I actually have to go, if I ask this question objectively, where does that lead? I have to follow the truth objectively. Unfortunately, that isn't generally good news for Christianity.
Yes. Objective critical thinking is the enemy of religion.
So that value kind of basically led to an inevitable dismantling of my faith, because
Christians would naturally argue that it wouldn't inevitably.
Yes, but they're wrong.
Because I'm assuming you've had lots of chats with your dad through this journey.
Yes. I mean, interestingly, less so directly with family. I think just because there's too much emotional baggage there. It's coming to a point that's a lot better, but like especially early on, there was plenty of conversations with lots of people.
Yes,
but not so much.
Not so much your family.
Just because it's very, very hard to
too raw
divorce the my growth from their personal, I guess, investment in their faith.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. And where did the journey out begin? Like, can you point to a point which is like more or less the genesis of that journey in your personal development? Would there be like being exposed to particular ideas, or just psychological growth, or what was the beginning?
It's hard to say. Like I said, a lot of the values I grew up with, I think, kind of, that are core to who I am, like principles that I still hold internally, and naturally kind of led to that path long term. But I guess, kind of in a more immediate sense, I'd say I did a gap year course through Anglican Youth Works called Year 13, which I think was a little bit disillusioning.
In what way? What did you study?
So it's kind of like a bit of Bible study, like some theology, combined with ministry and a mission trip overseas.
Where'd you go?
Uganda.
Wow.
Yes.
So you went to be a missionary in Uganda.
Yes.
For how long?
So it was 1 month.
1 month. Yeah. Wow.
So it was a very eye-opening experience, but I think it kind of left me a bit. It's like, you got a taste of a lot of different things. And it was kind of like, oh, well, that's not great. And then, so after that year, I was actually probably a bit burned out. And then I studied full-time in a job that wasn't super demanding. And so I spent a lot of time on the internet arguing and reading and that. And because of my values of wanting to believe in something because it's true, not just because I've been told to, that journey, that discovery, basically leads to that inevitable collapse of the Christian framework. Because it's kind of like, even though there's like with going back to the shelf analogy, it's kind of like one shelf then another shelf. But because I have this principle of like you follow the truth no matter what, you're just inevitably going to get to the bottom of that bookcase. I don't think I would have ever been able to stop and go like, I've asked enough questions, I'm comfortable here. It's like, that's not how I am. It's like, no, I need to see things as they are, for what they objectively and truly are.
So were there any particular things that you studied that struck you, like Daniel was describing the assignment that he didn't write? Like, were there any particular areas that like really struck you from your research? Like a surprising or counterintuitive, or wow, this makes me doubt a lot. Is it hard to remember?
Nothing, I guess, that much about biblical study or theology or anything. I guess there's a few fundamental things. Like there was one that was like God is all powerful and God is all knowing, and God knows me better than anyone. And so if I know that I'm objectively seeking truth and God as truth, he knows that. And if he knows that, he's the only person that matters. And so I've got nothing to fear in this journey. It's like I can...
Similar to the argument I've made with myself. Yeah, it's like God will help me figure it out.
Exactly. Yeah. If I believe in God as truth, then I follow truth with all of my heart, because that is the equivalent of following with God with all my heart. And I do that without reservation. And so that principle, I think, just kept me plowing through and really shattering everything I grew up with. Begrudgingly, by the way. Like, it was a very difficult and traumatic process. But it was that principle that kind of meant I just had to keep going.
How long was this journey, this transition journey and research?
I mean, from the point where I guess I stopped calling myself a Christian, I'd say it's like 3 or 4 years. In that. But I mean, it's hard to pinpoint, where the start of that was, where the end of that was. Because I feel like the start of it was probably when I was born and just having, being brought up with the values that I had. But I guess in terms of an intentional kind of self-evaluation, when that started, that was probably, 1 or 2 years out of high school. And then I think 3 or 4 years, it was kind of like, it wasn't a choice to not call myself a Christian, but I think a realization that it's like,
doesn't apply anymore.
Yeah, from what I believe in, from what I've learned, I can't honestly say that I am a Christian. Or I have a Christian faith.
And if you want to talk about it, or to whatever degree you want to talk about it, how did that play out in your family? Like their relationship with you, what kind of conflict did it generate?
It was nuts. I mean, it was really difficult, and it's still parts of it that are quite difficult.
Even all these years later, it's still in there.
Yeah, I mean, it's because I'm still, my family all still Christian. They still have a faith, but it's definitely evolved. They've definitely evolved. I've evolved. But I think when it was a bit more fresh, it was really difficult because it was hard to know what mattered. Because there was like these shared principles, but they were obviously playing out very differently in our lives. So for me to kind of be true to myself, I had to question my faith. And I think my family was, especially my dad, faith was everything. Faith was the solution to the playing out of his principles, and for me it was the opposite.
Yes.
And so even whilst there might be a deeper understanding of that or an appreciation of that, it's like the ways to express that or to kind of empathize with each other through that are so fraught. Because it's not like I'm over here, he's over there. It's kind of like so much more complicated than that. There's, he's over here and there's probably part of him over here and there's part of him over here and there's me over here and there's part of that. And so it's like, it just, it makes it complicated because he's not, in our relationship, we're not just confronting each other, we're confronting parts of ourselves.
Yes.
And so it's just, incredibly complicated, incredibly difficult, and sometimes very lonely, I guess. Because my family always cared for me, they just didn't care to question their faith, which was obviously very important to me. But that all gets grouped together in a very clumsy way. So it was very difficult, but on the other side of it, it's also been very edifying because it's tested our relationship and revealed the strength in our relationships. I think. Because it was very hard, it was arduous, but there was never a wavering in our love for each other. And so it's kind of like very nice to know that the love my family has for me and the love I have for them is stronger than even, such a divorce in philosophy and in the way you choose to live your life. And I think for that reason, actually, I'm now in a position where my relationship with my family is stronger than it's ever been, and I think stronger than most people are even capable of knowing with their own families.
That's wonderful.
So that's been
amazing.
Strange silver lining to the whole apostasy journey.
That's amazing. Excellent. Yeah, so that's a good high-level summary. Is there anything else you want to bring up about your journey before I ask, before I open to a conversation with all three of us, where we discuss two subjects I want to talk about? Anything else about your journey you want to say?
I mean, nothing that I could cover in a short
Yeah. But I enjoyed your saying how fraught it was with also difficulty with your family. Okay, so I want to have two more conversations now with both of you as an open forum, and they both relate to transitioning out of Christianity and religion. So the first is I want to talk a bit about truth claims in the Bible, but I don't want to get too bogged down by that because I know that could go on for hours. And the second,
I want to. Yeah, there is. Sorry,
Daniel. Yeah, I turned it from Michael's conversation because I was sitting over there to see Michael. There you go.
All good.
So the first, okay, let's start with the first, right? So as I said, one of the reasons I wanted to bring you on is because some people transition from Mormonism to Christianity, and they may not be exposed to the right information. Now, the debate around Mormonism, its truth claims and apologetics is so big that there's not enough time in the day to go through it. Like, it's so huge. There are apologetic websites and critical websites that have so much content that it would take months to troll through all of it, right? And I know it's the same for Christianity. I know that both of you have spent a significant amount of time in, you could call it the great debate, right? Of is Jesus the Son of God? Is the Bible true? Etc. etc. Now, we don't have time to go into like super deep depth because we could easily get bogged down in a lot of detail. And there are apologists, and so what I want to be clear on is, like, I want to raise a couple of issues, but I know that apologists respond to these issues, and we're not going to go into all those responses either, right? But what I wanted to ask both of you is, let's say someone is ex-Mormon and considering Christianity, and they're considering their beliefs around Christianity, because they've realized Mormonism isn't true, but they're not sure about Christianity, right? Or on the other side, let's say anyone in general is considering Christianity and the Bible and considering reading the Bible and figuring out what God wants, etc., etc. What are some of the high-level ideas that you would like to throw out to expose them to start their research into the criticism of Christianity? So I would start with, I mean, from my side, I would like to focus a bit more on the Bible in particular, because often the Bible is like the cornerstone of Christianity. And once if you can sort out the belief in this book, then that shifts to the next shelf, and then that's probably theism, which is a lot bigger of a debate, and we're not going to go into that. So let's just focus on like Christian theism and the Bible in particular. So at a high level, right? Someone's coming to you, they want to consider whether they should believe in the Bible or not. What are some of the things you want to expose them to, like just plain, straightforward information about the Bible that makes you think it's not very credible as a word of God, right? That's my high-level question. I know it's difficult to answer in 5 sentences, but
I'll kick it off, because this one for me was something that I really did investigate from an evangelical point of view. One of the big things that they push is that Jesus fulfilled all these prophecies, and of course more than evangelical, but evangelicals seem to highlight this. Jesus fulfilled all these prophecies from the Old Testament. As part of my transition and during my transition rather, and researching, I went and looked up the prophecies, which of course you can find in the Old Testament. And I funnily enough, I've never really done it before.
Never actually gone back and read those prophecies.
I just took, the
took it for granted.
Word for it. So I would say if before you said yes, before you agreed that Jesus fulfills all these prophecies as the New Testament recounts, go and look in the Hebrew scripture at the verses that are quoted. And what you'll find is one of 3 things. You'll find, number one, they're taken out of context. So, for example, many of sort of the Isaiah prophecies that are supposedly fulfilled, if you look in the book of Isaiah, it's pretty clear that if you look in the context of the verses that are quoted, it's talking about the suffering servant, for example, is talking about the nation of Israel, not an individual. Okay, so that's number one. Number two.
Do you, on that point, do you have any other quick examples you can throw out of prophecies that you can tell were taken out of context, like off the top of your head?
Off the top of my head, not off the top of my head, but okay. I would say Isaiah, which was such an influential book on early Christianity that some of, I think at least one of the church fathers wanted it sort of, included as, did he or not? Actually, redact that, edit that. I'll retract that statement.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah.
The mind can't remember this precision after so long.
Sure. Okay, and then the second thing you said. So one was taken out of context.
Right. The second one is that you will find quotes that are apparently quoted from the Old Testament, but they've been edited. For example, if you look at the book of Acts. And I think it's chapter 3, where Peter is in the upper room and he's preaching to the crowds, and he quotes, and I do forget the book, unfortunately, but it starts with, in the last days, it is written in the last days that God will pour out his spirit, etc., etc. You go and look at the Old Testament passage that that's quoting from. It does not say in the last days. That has been inserted by the author of Acts, who has traditionally been ascribed to Luke. It doesn't say that. That has been a clear editing on the part of the author to align it with the events of the New Testament. So that's the second thing. You'll find that these things are edited. And the third thing is some of the things are actually invented, it seems. For example, in Matthew chapter 3, it says that Jesus fulfilled a prophecy, he shall be called a Nazarene. And that prophecy can't be found anywhere in the Old Testament. Now, I've looked at apologist things and they've said... Like
the documents could be missing.
Oh, I said like well, maybe it was an oral tradition. And it's like, well, you can't rule that out. But that's a bit of a damn stretch.
Yeah.
And when you also, when you align it with what else, the things such as the quoting out of context, the actual editing of Old Testament passages, you'd have to say that the possibility of the authors sort of going out of their way to make
threads fit together,
make the beliefs. Make the evidence fit the beliefs.
Yes,
is much more likely.
Yes. Okay, good. So that's one of the top of your head is like a criticism is that in the Bible, the whole Jesus fulfilling prophecies is not nearly as neat and clean as it sounds.
Absolutely.
Like there's this implication from Christians who I've heard before, like, how could he fulfill every prophecy so perfectly? All these prophecies. Says that he will do this, and then he did it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
and that's not to say, of course, like that's not to say that other things about him could be true. But if you're going to make the claim on the basis of fulfillment of prophecy, your go-to on why you then therefore believe everything else, you're on pretty shaky ground, I think.
Okay, and then at a high level. What are some of the other things, like, out of all the criticisms of the Bible, there's like a whole range, right? And some of them are stronger criticisms than others. Like they're just knockdowns, where the others, apologists could say something, as you said, and maybe the apologists are right, or it's unknown. So the apologist smoke and mirrors can be sort of effective, right? So I want to turn to like the knockdowns, like the things that were most obvious, right? One you've shared with me in the past is that, I don't remember, is it Matthew 5 or my Bible is even worse, of course, but where Jesus is making all these, it's definitely not Matthew 5, all these last day prophecies.
Yes.
And then he says, "This generation shall not pass away until all these things are brought to pass."
That's right. That's in Matthew around chapter 10-ish.
Okay, 10.
Yeah. It's called the Little Apocalypse. Section where Jesus preaches says a number of things. heaven, where can't remember. I knew this off by heart at one point. I don't now. But basically, he says that all these things, and this is apocalyptic. This is the end of the world kind of stuff. All these things will happen before this generation passes away.
Yeah.
Which means it needed to happen within the lifetime of his listeners.
Exactly.
Right. So, and I think, and as you go through, and indeed in the writings of St. Paul, if you look at sort of 1 or 2 Thessalonians, there was in early Christianity a very distinct belief that the end of the world
was around the corner.
Was right around the corner.
Yep.
And we know that when that didn't happen, this particular belief was sort of quietly dropped. And you can see the progress of Paul's letters from sort of 1 Thessalonians right through to his later letters, such as Romans. That this kind of fervent apocalyptic belief gets quietly dropped, and it's kind of more now talking about the theology, Christology, and these things. And the same is for the gospel writers. You'll see that Mark, which is believed by many to be the earliest gospel, highlights this more than the others, than say John, which is believed to be the last written. So there's a pretty clear trajectory where, when this particular prophecy isn't fulfilled, it's kind of dropped. And the letter of Peter, the Epistle of Peter, which is the most obvious, what they call pseudepigrapha, meaning it was falsely written under the Apostle Peter's name, actually criticizes the groups of people who say that, well, you said the end of the world was about to happen, didn't happen, and this kind of very pompous letter, really. And it says like, well, to God, 1,000 years is like a day, 1,000 years, and therefore it's how can you say that it's right around the corner? Because in God's time, it is right around the corner, essentially.
Yeah.
Which is kind of, again, it's like
brushing it under the carpet,
really,
apologetic.
Really. Was that really the intention of the author to say it's actually not really around the corner, although I'm kind of saying it is, but it's not really?
Apologetics started right back then.
So exactly within the page of the Bible itself.
Yes.
You have
apologetics.
You have this. Yes.
Yeah. No, that's good. So some of the others that come to my mind, just briefly, I think when I started reading The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins, he says that the narrative between some of the Gospels, even in terms of the basic dates and events that happened, are like way off. But I don't remember the exact details. Do you remember anything about that?
Well, yeah, they had, again, in the Luke census, the census in Luke, which we discussed,
which is very
earlier,
unlikely to have actually happened. Yeah,
it was when Herod was king and Quirinius was governor of Judea. Galilee. Sorry again. My memory's not too great anymore, but it's a little bit rusty. But history will show that they those two things didn't happen at the same time. Now some say, well, Herod was king, but then he had sons Herods, and they were really the tetrarch. So maybe he was talking about the tetrarch, or maybe Quirinius was governor twice, and we've lost the records of his second. And it's like you can say all this stuff.
That's right.
But it appears on the evidence that, in fact, those things didn't happen at the same time. So, and again, Luke claims to be history, and this is the challenge, because if you claim to be a historical account or a thoroughly researched, accurate account, and then the very next thing out of your mouth
is inaccurate,
then that kind of calls into question. And the little verse that used to go around my head that Jesus says, well, if you can't be trusted with little things, how can you be trusted with big things? If you can't be trusted with little claims, how can you be trusted with big claims? Is the little thing that I used to, think about when looking at this stuff. Because it's well, don't worry about that. It's just a couple of dates. Well, you did claim it to be history, so the whole book. So yeah.
Yeah, cool. Okay. Any others, Michael? Were there any that struck you that you remember from your research?
No man, I never got to Daniel's level, I think, of sophistication in terms of my theology and things like that.
But in saying that, we came from it, I think, based on our own way in. I think.
Yes. The journeys are different, and then the emphases are different.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's a hard question for me to answer because I don't care. Like, I mean, I don't mean that in like a cynical way, but I guess it's just with these conversations, I've found that you've really got to go back to go to that person. Okay, what's important to you here? And because the reality is, for most people who like Christians, especially apologists and that, is that their agenda is so different, right? They have a vested interest in the Bible, and it's tied up in their emotional life and their spiritual life and things like that.
So you're looking at it more from a psychological point of view.
So for me, before I'd be even willing to enter a discussion about theology or the Bible, I'd have to go, what's important to this person?
By the way, if you touch the table, I think it'll knock the microphones out.
So what's important to this
noise,
person? And the truth is, like, it's if they want to know the truth, like if the truth is actually important to them, then it can be a very productive conversation. But that's not the reality most of the time. Most of the time, the reality is like their theology is important to them. And in which case, it's kind of like, no matter what conversation we have about, biblical accuracy and all that, there's always an excuse to hide behind.
Yes.
If it's not about objective truth and evidence, there's always going to be a way to salvage, your belief in something.
I totally agree with that. But on the same token, like taking me, for example, or taking Daniel, you had to be exposed to some critical information. And at that time, you weren't ready, but that gave you a flavor. And so that's why I like talk about that. I totally agree that ultimately whether someone transitions or not comes down to probably more so psychological factors than information factors. But information factors can start the journey. Like they can open that crack. Because I totally understand.
I find when I do that, I guess evaluation. Like if I can see these conversations
you're looking at
coming up
from a high level.
Trying to understand that person, because like a lot of the times you'll be like, I think that people don't even necessarily realize what they're motivated by. And a lot of the time I'll give the benefit of the doubt and say, be happy to kind of have exploratory discussions. But in terms of a deep dive into like a really intense,
theological
debate, it's just I've got better things to do with my time. And I actually don't think it adds value to either of us.
And I would say that there is a can't see the forest for the trees. When you start getting these discussions, you can get completely lost debating the finer points of biblical criticism and historicity and so forth. And there's always something out there you can, however likely improbable, you can say, well, if this and this and this and this happened, then that could have happened.
Yes, it solves those problems.
And that goes back to, I think, much more what you're saying is that there's a certain amount of, it's almost the weight of evidence put in front of you, depending on where you are and your motivations of being there. It can just bounce off.
So to that point, to that, and I think that's a really, really good point, which is this. I believe that most people who are religious, or who are at least moderate, are generally reasonable people. Right? We're surrounded by these people in our day-to-day life.
Yeah,
we work with them, we buy food from them, whatever. So most of them are reasonable. The key factor that usually keeps their beliefs is that they've just not been immersed in enough critical information. But I think, Michael, to your point, is that immersion in critical information does not happen unless the psychological being is ready, unless this person is ready to go. So in all of our cases, like for me, I got immersed in some critical information, but I went and chased the additional information. So did you, right? You said, I'm going to chase this and find out what the truth is. And you were the same. As soon as you were exposed to some information, something within you triggered, and you went and looked for additional information. And so I think your key point is, if that person isn't willing to go look or consider the possibility that they're wrong, then you actually can't force feed them the information, or to correct myself, you can't force feed them sufficient amounts of information for them to actually lose their belief. Like sometimes you can give them a little bit, a taste that then leads them to start thinking, but they still have to go on their own and start reading books and start looking at YouTube videos and whatever.
And there is a case, and I'm just thinking now, the proverb or whatever, the bigger they are, the harder they fall. In this sense, and I certainly speak for myself, that the deeper you go, I think the higher the chance, you're gonna get spat out, if I can put it that way. If you're a moderate religious person, right?
Yes,
church when you need to, Christmas, Easter, and a few times in between.
Yes.
You never really
never really think much about it.
You never think too much about it. You sort of you grew up with you as part of your life. There could be for some community. There's actually a lot of communities would be from an ethnic background. I know that there a lot of Uniting churches now have a Korean service or a Samoan service and so forth, and it's almost part and parcel. It's like a local your local kind of club, if you like. It's not just religion. You also go there as part of your ethnic community group as well. So there's other things going on.
That's right.
Besides, I believed X, Y, and Z about the Bible.
I totally agree. In fact, I think
for those people, they've never that's a terrible thing to say, but they've never taken it that seriously that any of this is really going to cause them too much of a bother.
Yes.
Is that
absolutely?
Yeah.
I think for the vast majority of moderate religious people, I was becoming a missionary just over 12 years ago, and I was going to a missionary training center, and some of the kids who were going to become missionaries had never read the Book of Mormon in their life, and they were going out to preach to other people that the Book of Mormon is true, right? And in fact, one girl, I remember, she said she was in the missionary training center learning Mormon theology, and she was like, I never knew this stuff before. That was an illustration for me, and she was just a normal Mormon girl. So I think if you just randomly pick a Christian off the street, put them in this room and start interrogating them about the Bible or Christianity, you'll probably find their knowledge is just knee deep, not much deeper, right? And that's why the criticisms, all these things, they're just like meh. Just goes by. And then they're not really subject to criticism. On the other hand, it's not too bad to be in that situation as a moderate, because you don't suffer much of the shame and the guilt that the more intense believers suffer. So we took our religions extremely seriously when we were in, and as a result of that, take for example, Daniel, you were sharing that when you were before your transition, you were praying to get a full-time job, and you're thinking, oh, is it that I'm not fasting or I'm not doing something wrong? Well, I bet you there's a huge number of Christians who either they don't even pray to get the job, right? Or if they do or they don't get it, they don't really think much about why. They just keep plodding on, and so again, knee-deep belief and knee-deep knowledge. And actually, all things considered, that's not actually too bad. to just be knee deep, because a lot of the suffering that religion can cause you are alleviated from, because you have a strong sense of self-identity. You go to church, but then you just go watch sport afterwards, and you just have a drink with your mates, and you really are a Sunday Christian or whatever, Sunday Mormon in our case. It's actually not such a bad thing after all. Although the religions will continuously put out rhetoric against those people. They'll tell, oh, don't just sit there on the bench and listen to me talking, go and do something good in the world, blah, 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 blah.
That's right.
And then they just go have drinks with mates anyway. And just ignore that, right?
Yes.
That's good. So good. Thanks for your thoughts. Now let's turn to the next chapter, which is let's talk about post-religious life. Let's talk about long time ago we realized that the creator of the universe, wasn't caring about the underwear we're wearing in our cases, or the coffee that we're drinking. Long time ago we realized the creator of the universe isn't pulling the strings of our life, making us meet this girl to get married, or like this person to get a job, and these kinds of things. Now that was a long time ago, but what has this journey meant to you now that you've left? Like, what kinds of doors has it opened in your life for you to reconsider your viewpoints on different subjects? So like, I'm talking about your post-religious worldview. Like the assumption, the premise for this conversation is that Christianity isn't true, the Bible isn't true, there isn't a theist God. That's the premise.
Yeah.
That's one sentence, now it's over. What now? Where does that leave you in your journey? And obviously in the beginning it's really hard to realize that, and you have to rebuild your worldview from the bottom up. But what kinds of things influenced you in rebuilding that worldview, and where did your mind go in the subsequent years? That's a big question.
Huge question. I mean, I guess broadly speaking, I'd say that it's really hard. I don't think there's any kind of dancing around that. To leave a religion is a traumatizing experience. It is difficult. It'll pervade every aspect of your life, and it'll hurt. I think you can't get away from that. But that comes with, I guess, a qualifier or of something comforting, is that it's also, in my experience, I did never think I could be as strong or as wise as I am today. And that that journey out of faith has made me someone I'm really proud to be, and someone I'm excited to be, and has made me very excited about the future. So I guess that's the overarching moral of the story, is that it's yes, it's terrifying, all those things you are afraid of, you should be afraid of, but also you will discover things about yourself, a strength in yourself, I think.
From having endured that, you become very strong.
And then you are free as well. You shall know the truth, and it shall set you free, or whatever the verse is, I can't remember.
That's pretty much it.
And so it's it's the things that are going to hurt are going to hurt. The things that you're afraid of are worth being afraid of. But the secret weapon is that, I think, that inner strength that you can unleash in yourself and into the world, which sounds very airy fairy, but I think it's deeply true.
Absolutely.
I'd completely concur. I had the benefit of seeing a very helpful psychologist to be able to readjust to normalcy, I guess. Coming from one worldview to another worldview, which fundamentally operated very differently. We talked about false persona. And in evangelical Christianity, it's all about becoming like Jesus. Less of you, more of him, capital H, right?
Your identity.
Identity is and that was one of the things that terrified me when I was coming out. It's like, well, if I'm not a Christian, then who the heck am I? I thought it was so critical to my identity. But in fact, what's happened is I said this, it's a psychological term, the false persona. And imagine your identity as a house, and there's a lot of doors to rooms have been shut off, and in fact behind those doors are parts of yourself which have been shut off. Coming to it though, I thought, well, I didn't even know there were doors there, let alone there was something behind those doors in terms of aspect of your own identity. But religion says, well, shut these off. These things they're not important now. This is how you have to be like. So it was a very a pleasantly surprising experience that there were other dimensions you know, that have been there. And again, this is sort of going into something in your late teens, that had been, you know, the door sort of shut and sealed. And then discover that there was something there, you know, there has been something there all the time, but it's not being allowed to breathe, I guess, in the interest of conformity and, you know. So yeah, so it's a wonderful experience when you discover that there is actually a lot more to you than your religious beliefs. It's a wonderful discovery to make.
I think it's great that we've touched on the subject of identity, because one of the biggest, so back in 2016, I had sort of realized Mormonism wasn't true, but I was doing exactly what you guys are talking about, which is rethinking my identity. And I came across a book that I want to shout out to that had a huge impact on me, which was Stephen Hassan's book, Combating Cult Mind Control. So in this book, he goes through a lot of very useful information and ideas, but one thing in particular he does is that highlights that a cult, and I'm not quoting Mormonism a cult per se or Christianity per se, but they have cult-like elements. What they will do is systematically erode your identity through your indoctrination and replace that with a cult identity, which is usually in the image of the main leader of that cult, right? The personality leader. So he was in the Moonies, for example, and he tells a story of he was in the Moonies, the Unification Church, I think. And he was telling about how he was a young man and he joined, and his identity was systematically replaced by another identity. And when you lose your faith, that identity is like having the rug tugged underneath you, taken out. And that's extremely, as you said, traumatic, disconcerting. But what then can happen is you're opened up to build a new identity. You're given a whole new world, a whole new life to figure things out. And there are different ways to react to that. Like one way is fear. You know, this is too scary. I don't know how I'm going to figure out what I believe or what I think. And often I think fear, in my opinion, fear is what leads some Mormons to transition and become Christians. Because clearly the Mormon identity is wrong, but we're not yet ready to rebuild our own one completely. So we'll just take something else that's also prepackaged off the shelf. And that, you know, it's more liberal and so on and so on. And so we'll just take this one. And I really believe that's the case. But what you could do instead, of course, is like reconsider your whole identity layer by layer. Bless you. And that can be really exciting. Like there's an exciting aspect of it. So taking, for example, me, ethics is an area that I'm very interested in. And having left religion, I really wanted to know what I thought ethically. Because, you know, you hear people say the argument, well, if there's no God, then, you know, what's wrong with me taking a chainsaw and chopping people up? And these kinds of silly arguments. And so I wanted to figure out what my moral compass was and what it revolved around. And that led me to go and read books like The Moral Landscape by Sam Harris, which I very much subscribe to. And to then systematically reevaluate the foundation. Your foundation has been removed. Now that's very disconcerting. You've stared into the abyss and you don't believe in God. What are you going to build in its place? And my suggestion to anyone who's going on that journey is to take it slow, because there's a lot of room for screwing up your life in the middle there, where you can just decide to do anything and everything you want, and try all sorts of substances and go and do all sorts of things. And so like take it slow and figure it out. But it is a really exciting opportunity. And I love how you've touched on that. It is a world view. So it's not just an opinion on a few matters. It's a holistic viewpoint of everything, how you interpret everything in your life, how you interpret reality, and all information that comes to you is filtered through that worldview. And so leaving religion is a massive paradigm shift.
Absolutely.
And like that's what I wanted to touch on with both of you. It's like, how did you go about that journey? Like, also, did you read books about various subjects and find books really helpful? Like, not biblical criticism books, or like just like worldview books or self-help books or those kinds of things. Were there any books that you found useful? Either of you?
For me, the Brené Brown is probably was the most relevant one. I think to kind of...
Is that Dare to Lead, or is that one of our other books?
I have trouble with remembering which ones are which.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of her work around shame really helped me kind of dismantle a lot of the self-worth issues that I had. So it's kind of a lot of it's like the self-help stuff is that was more about looking after yourself, because I think that's the first thing that kind of, the most basic need that needs to be met is that ability to have self-compassion and treat yourself with love, because that's not something I think religion really teaches you to do very well. And so, that was the first missing step that kind of allowed so much of the other stuff to kind of move on, which is kind of interesting because Brené Brown is Christian.
Is she Christian? Yes. I actually suspected. I was like, I've heard her speak a bit, and from where she's from, you obviously question that.
No, she's a church girl every Sunday.
Oh, really?
But obviously a bit more involved. But her works I think were essential for me because I was in this new space where I was very vulnerable, and I think her work kind of gave me the tools to be okay with that vulnerability and to move forward with it as well.
That's excellent. Any books that you can think of?
Yeah, there was one, and I came across it in a cheap, bargain basement bookstore. And there was only a single copy, and if I was still religious, I would have believed it was Providence that put it in my hands. The book was called Leaving the Fold. Now, I can't remember the author's name, but she is a psychologist over in California.
It's Marlene something.
Yeah, I think it is actually, yes. She wrote about the idea, you'd be familiar with post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yeah.
She coined the term, I think, religious traumatic stress disorder in terms of leaving religion, and that in fact leaving a religion has many of the same symptoms of post-traumatic stress. So that book was very helpful. I don't know if I actually kind of finished the book itself, but certainly I found other articles and interviews with her as well online. So that was very good, and it was particularly good for me to know. I can't remember the specific points that were helpful, but just the general idea that this was common enough, right? And there was a clinical psychologist had actually identified the cause. Made me feel, well, I'm not kind of weird for feeling the way I do. This is actually quite common.
So like validating.
Yeah, and it was, and it was. In fact, to the extent, and I think, Mark, I've mentioned it before. You were the first person who I met, who I knowingly met, who had left church. Because I think a lot of people had left, but I just didn't know, right? People I knew, because it's not something you talk about. It's not something you talk about, not something people who kind of fall off your radar.
The church doesn't really
reach out and go, hey, Daniel, how you going? By the way, I've left religion. Do you want to catch up for a coffee?
Yeah.
You don't get those kind of messages from people. So I think often a lot of people think they're the only one going through this.
Yeah.
So the book was good from that point of view, if nothing else. Yeah.
Absolutely. It's great. Well, I'll shout out to a few books. Naturally, I've mentioned Sam Harris, one of my favorite authors. He is interesting because he's done work on religion, but he's also done a lot of work on other concepts that I found really not necessarily any relationship to religion, of course, with, like, as I said, an atheist backdrop.
Yeah.
As I've mentioned, The Moral Landscape gives a really good grounding in basic ethics, and that you do what you do to promote well-being. And if you are motivated to increase the well-being of conscious beings around you who can experience well-being or suffering, then that is the very definition of good and ethics. So the Moral Landscape was a really good book for me. I've actually read, I think, pretty much every book Sam Harris wrote. But he has a couple of books on other ethical topics like honesty. He has a book called Lying. He has a book called Waking Up. I don't know if either of you have read it.
I haven't read it. I know I've heard of it.
Yeah. Waking Up, A Guide to Spirituality Without Religion. One of the most impactful books for me personally, because leaving religion for me left me devoid, not devoid of spirituality, that's the wrong term, but like religion was my spirituality, so I needed some replacement. And it really took some time for me to find that replacement. And I love science, and of course I'm inspired by the universe, and so I love documentaries, and I feel spiritual when I'm contemplating the cosmos, right? But there was more to it. I think there was something else that was missing, and Waking Up had a lot about meditation and the self and other subjects, and so I found that incredibly useful. So those are some books, but I like that you've touched on self-help. Like, I think one of my favorite books is actually The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which is written by a Mormon, ironically.
It's a great book, that one.
Yes, it is a really, really wonderful book. In fact, on my blog, I have an article which critiques it from a secular viewpoint. Like, I've actually said how this book could be changed to make it secular. Like, it just needs a little bit of editing.
It wouldn't need much, would it?
It wouldn't need much, actually, yeah. But like, Steve Covey, he can't help but like, at the end of the book, he's like, by the way, God created principles, blah, blah, blah. Just like launches into his religious belief.
It comes out of nowhere.
Left field, right? It's like, what? Yeah. So self-help books can really help, like set the stage for your progression in your life. And then other things, like just general things like hobbies, keeping up things like exercise, friends, career. All of us are very career focused. For us to have this conversation, we had to stop talking about work for a while, and that was really tough.
Yeah, that's right.
So like career, that kind of thing, because there are so many things that you can shift your focus to when you leave religion.
Yeah, that's right. Actually,
in fact, career is one that's personally very pertinent to you, I think. It's like when you left, you started focusing more on your career and growing.
Absolutely. As part of my transition, after 6 years, I got another contract, which had the opportunity to go permanent. And previously, as I said, I'd prayed, and I haven't landed a permanent job. Came very close twice, but both times they fell over. So, and again, and months of unemployment in between. So I decided to do something different this time. And this was after, by the way, the course that I talked about earlier at Catholic University. I decided to not pray and just do a really good job in within the contract period. And on that basis alone, see if I could get the job. And in fact, that's what happened. So I went from, and again, it wasn't quite an A/B test, but
close enough.
But and again, it's like, well, I didn't pray at all. I just worked hard. Not to say I didn't work hard in the other contracts, but I just worked hard, and I got the job. Where for the 6 years previously, I'd been praying, and nothing had happened in terms of permanent work. So that was interesting, and then so that opened up a whole new way of thinking about my career, and it's more than just work as unto the Lord, right? Which I know you're familiar with. So which is kind of a little bit of a fool's errand, because you have to think much more broadly than just simply working within the parameters of whatever the boss tells you. You understand? You have to be looking out for opportunities to network with, within the company. For example, build sort of relationships outside your normal lines of reporting or your team, and so on and so forth. Keep in touch with the people who've moved on from the organisation. Very, very different to just do a really, really good job, and that's all you have to do, if that makes sense. Yeah, and then just pray for the pray for the rest. Just pray for the upgrade. Yeah, that's right. So yeah, very, very different approach. But that's it's my approach to life now as well. Whereas where my religious background would say basically self-help, if you like, was idolatry. These are not my words. It's idolatry if you're not fully reliant on God, right? If you're trying to look after yourself in worldly ways, then that's idolatry because you're not fully reliant on God, and you're saying, well, God's not enough, and I fundamentally don't trust him because I'm simply not taking everything to him in prayer, instead of thinking more strategically about what's in front of you and making decisions on the evidence that's actually presented to you.
Absolutely.
Very different way of thinking.
Yeah, that's good.
It's kind of interesting because I feel like it's the ability to love yourself seems to have a direct correlation with your ability to love others. And so it's like the compassion and love I can extend to myself increases, the order of magnitude by which I seem to be able to love and care for other people, particularly, my family and the people close around me. And
it's a bit counterintuitive, isn't it? There's this idea in religion, especially, that you should be selfless and focus all of your energy on other people. And what tends to happen there is you just get exhausted, and you become kind of useless to other people anyway. It's like you can't really do much. Whereas the opposite is there's this abundance mentality where like there's enough love to go around. So first you start by loving yourself, taking good care of yourself, and then you'll have an overflow of energy and time and desire to help other people. And that's a bit counterintuitive, isn't it? From the intuitions you inherit from being religious.
It's the old, like on the plane that's deep.
The oxygen mask.
The oxygen mask. They always tell you put on your own oxygen mask before you help someone next to you.
Yes.
Whereas certainly the version of Christianity which I practiced was go around and put everyone else's oxygen mask on, and if there's time at the end to put yours on, well, then you can
maybe
do that
think
then.
about it. Yeah,
exactly. It's actually a very, very different way of looking at the world, and that's not to say you should stop caring about the people around you at all. In fact, one of the I may have preempted questions here. Obviously, I used to give to church, but it was much more focused around missional efforts. So growing the missional capacity, I guess, of the church, whether it be the church that I was currently at or them sending money to missionaries overseas and so forth. So not believing that is a good use of money anymore, I now give to other charities, and I'll do a call out to Blue Dragon, who operates a children's charity in Vietnam that rescues particularly children, particularly young girls, from human trafficking. Essentially, it's pretty nasty stuff. But I know that the money I give now is actually saving someone, maybe not from quote unquote hell, but certainly from hell on earth. And when you can see your money actually, as you're talking about in terms of Sam Harrison and well-being and so forth, making such a change to someone's life, that is definitely a cause worth supporting. And that has been again, it's a change. The change has come about because of the way I think about the world now. It's not to say I wouldn't have done that in the past, but I would have thought saving people from the religious hell was more important, and that was a more loving thing to do, and better for their well-being.
It can be such a distraction from well-being on earth.
Absolutely.
And there's so many resources collectively from religions go to proselytizing over charitable work that could make such a good difference.
Absolutely.
Cool. So wonderful. Thank you both. It's been a wonderful conversation. Is there anything else you want to shout out before we wrap it up?
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you both for coming.
Thank you for having us. And I will say this too, if you haven't picked up already, that you can leave, or you can transition out from a religion and still go on to a healthy, happy, fulfilling life.
Yes.
I didn't think it was possible.
Yeah.
Then I met Michael, and he gave me well, actually, he's someone who's about 5 years ahead of me.
Your savior.
And we don't believe in these things anymore. You were an inspiration.
Thanks, man.
You were an inspiration, and to help me keep going on the journey I'd already begun. So to anyone out there who thinks that you need to stay where you are to have any sense of a happy, content, fulfilling life, the answer is there is hope outside of where you currently reside.
Yeah, that's a wonderful thought, I think, to conclude with, is that it does get better. People who are transitioning can feel like the world is going to end and they can't see a way out where they'd ever be happy again. And I think I've definitely been in that situation before. And nowadays, when I talk to people, I'll tell them that I don't think I've ever been happier as an aggregated level. You know, in these years since leaving, I've been much happier than before. So absolutely, yeah, that's a wonderful note. It gets better, and just keep going. Don't give up.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you both.
Well, thanks for the opportunity.
Absolutely excellent. And we'll wrap it up here. Thank you, listeners, for staying with us all this time. And we'll wrap it up, and we'll see you in the next episode.